Morning, Rick. I just saw you sneaking in there as well.
Good morning, Ron.
All right, Audit and Risk Management Committee members, we are live and ready to begin the meeting.
Okay, I'll start by calling the meeting to order. And as a first item, Chrisanne, if I could ask you to read the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge the land we are standing on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you, Chrisanne. Can I ask other members of the committee whether there are any declarations of interest? Joanne?
No
Alan?
conflicts.
Sorry, Alan, any conflicts?
Nope, sorry.
Okay. All right, no problem. Okay, approval of the minutes. Can I ask you, Joanne, to make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting held on June 3rd?
I so move.
Okay, Alan, you'll second that?
Yes, on this occasion.
Okay, and we're all in favor. Just a reminder to people that this meeting is being live streamed on the YouTube channel. I think because it's going to be a relatively short meeting, plus there's just the three of us, we don't need to go through the heroics of emailing in requests to speak or ask questions. I'll make sure that you have an opportunity to do so. And if you run into technical difficulties, I think you have the people to get in touch with. So with that as introduction, our item today is just really to get an update from Christine Leach on the flexible work plan status for the audit, risk and compliance. So Christine, maybe I can turn that to you to introduce that item for us.
For sure, Ron. Thank you. So yes, this is officially our first update to the RMC since February. So I've sort of grouped things into 5 key categories that we'll move through. And we have 2 presentations, not too long, but just to kind of give you a status update in more detail. So the first item that I want to update on is what we've called our review of past assurance projects. And essentially what this was is I had 2 staff, Debbie and Ellen, did a great job. And if I can just move to the first slide, I'll give you a bit of background. But the intent of this initiative was really to serve as a project reset for ARC and gave us an opportunity to review where we have focused our energies and efforts in the past through a risk lens. It was really an opportunity also to increase management awareness as to some of our past observations, because certainly over the past 7 years, we've had changes in responsible, accountable chiefs and executives. And the reason we chose 7 years is because that really matches our working paper retention bylaw. So that was why we chose that period of time to review. And ultimately, the results of this work is to help us inform our next work plan, which we hope to bring to the next RMC in December. So essentially what the work involved was reviewing over the 7 years about 149 pieces of work. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just go to the next slide because we have a pictorial. So we started with 149 pieces of work that really kind of covered everything from updates to reports to memos, etc. And what we did is sort of cipher out what we believe to be more assurance-based work. Assurance being it involved testing, substantive testing, review of controls. So that resulted to about 69 pieces of work, which averaged about 10 per year, which is really what we used to aim for in terms of comprehensive audits. From that, we also ciphered out what we believe to be reports that had similar findings and observations with the Auditor General. So we didn't really want to duplicate follow-up with that respect. So when you take that all away, that really left us with 27 main groupings of findings and projects that we use to initiate follow-up and discussions with management. And really, we were focusing more on, through that risk lens, where we feel we've made some good progress in terms of mitigating it. As you can see on the right there, we've done pretty well in terms of reaching certainly some completion on some of our items and some great moderate to high mitigation progress. So if I go to the next slide. As I said, we really kind of wanted to review our work with that sort of risk lens. And to help organize things, we identified essentially 6 categories of risk, high-level risk, which we just sort of labeled there. As you can see on the right, traditionally, audit groups do tend to cover more commercial management, so contracts, procurement, financial type risks, as well as asset management. Obviously, given our organization, reviewing of preventive maintenance and schedule adherence, planning of work, that certainly took up the bulk of our energies in the past. But we have started to branch off and address other areas of risk around looking at the customer experience, obviously safety, IT, and workforce. If we can just go to the next slide. So this is sort of the first of the next series of couple of slides. And essentially what we did is we grouped our work, and just to highlight, the first column is what we've articulated as being the risks that we addressed back when we did the audit. We've identified the group or the main chief that we feel is accountable, responsible for the action items. We've given a very high level summary in the next column of some of the key actions that for management have been taken since the audit work was completed. We've put what we believe to be a reasonable assessment of the risk reductions efforts to date. And the last column, as I said, is really an opportunity to renew and recommit to some further action items. So that's the theme of the columns. As far as employee safety goes, excuse me, obviously employee safety is a cornerstone of the TTC corporate plan. So some of the work that we have done in this area, recognizing that the work night shift and tunnel work is a pretty rough work environment. So there's obviously hazards and safety risks associated with that. So we've spent some time there. And the main observations that we noted back when we did the audit work was really, it was great that they were doing some quality control of their own and quality checks, but we thought that there was a need for greater independence and a more robustness to their sort of what they would call their safety checks. So working with safety assurance group and safety in general through the operations group, they've really kind of stepped up and are contributing and making more observations independent of those individuals within the groups themselves. And I think that will continue. Next slide, please. I'm really just kind of highlighting a few of these things. Obviously, if there's questions that people want to pose, we can stop. Asset management, again, historically an area where we've spent time reviewing maintenance and controls around adhering to schedules, etc. We've obviously reviewed controls around access to assets, their use, the procurement thereof. And I think this is an area that we will be spending time going forward, simply because the expectations for asset management policy is stepping up. It has to be aligned with the city and expectations around the sort of municipal infrastructure regulations. Next slide, please. So commercial management, actually the next 2 slides deal with commercial management. And as I said earlier, I mean, this is really a traditional area for any audit group, including the Auditor General, having spent time, whether it be reviewing contracts, reviewing pricing validation, payment controls, etc. And as you can see, a lot of work is being done at a granular level as well as a high level. We've done a lot of work recently in the last year or so working with, I keep calling them M&P, but I know they're P and C&M now, and legal, reviewing contract language and tightening up things in that area. But commercial management as a topic in and of itself is an area that a lot of energy is being devoted. And I think I would just like to call on Josie, our CFO, because she's kind of driving a lot of initiatives in this area. And I thought it would just be great for her to speak at a high level, at least, on what kind of efforts are being made within her group. So Josie, if you want to just step in, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I guess really, there are really three pieces here because it's a combination of financial management. It's around procurement management, and then of course commercial management, because they all kind of interlay over each other. And so there are a series of activities that have been happening in all three spheres. Specifically on commercial management, let me just go back a little bit. On our materials and procurement management, we've been transforming that function. It was one department. It's now being split into three with a focus and a professionalization of the materials management side. And there's a lot of work being done around understanding our inventory and how we're managing the things that we actually get in. On the procurement and category management is the second area. That is also, there's been a lot of work being done on category management and strategic sourcing. In both those areas, we've just hired new heads for those functions. And so lots of good work being planned in there. The third area, which is the specific commercial management area, we're just about to go out out to the street to hire that head. But we're bringing in the practice into the organization. We have ensured that in the interim as that happens, that all the kind of risk areas, kind of major capital projects and service agreement areas all have commercial management services expertise built in as we continue down that road. More specifically, we are tying and strengthening our financial oversight around procurement and contract management. I think the report refers to a new executive committee, review committee that's just being set up to ensure that we're reviewing all contracts, existing, new contracts, to ensure that we're looking at all contract changes in a way that lines up our budget with kind of the scope and timing and deliverables. And so that also interplays with project management. So lots happening on this front. I think the key point is that all these things are really connected, and people being clear about their budget, which essentially sets their authority, and working with people to do better procurement, and understanding that vendor relationship management is an important part of it, as is contract management. So happy to take any questions when the committee would like to discuss it.
I have a question.
Sure.
So Josie, to what extent, we know that this sounds great, by the way, and it looks terrific, the congratulations. In terms of then execution against these, we all know that, capturing them in the objectives of the executive team, but also the operational team is key. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of an insight into how you do that. How do you ensure that the outcomes are that individuals who may be responsible in your team know what those outcomes are, and they are reflected in the objectives that you set for them through the year?
So I would say specifically in working with the heads in the actual departments that are under me, we are tightening up policy, we're tightening up procedures. There are AG recommendations that kind of looked at contract management issues, like around our after warranty parts savings, and how we're looking at alternate sourcing, P-card. So those are all examples of things that are sitting in their objectives for us to actually engage in. Another area, of course, is procurement policy. So we're looking at that And then specifically working with all the departments to bring up kind of the level of acumen and education around, the policies and understanding what we're doing. So there's an executive level kind of discussion around kind of what are those key objectives. Those are brought through our various governance committees. We have a finance executive committee, a management executive committee, but we're working through all that. And now with these new heads here, I believe that, we've got a very clear path of moving forward. Through the budget process, what we're ensuring is that, as I said, those areas, we're ensuring that in the capital projects that we have, the high risk, high value, high impact projects, as well as those key service agreements. So, for example, we'll be talking about Presto later, making sure there's a commercial management capacity built in. So we're using the budget process to integrate those needs into our funding so that that capacity is built in. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Great, so we'll continue on. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Which again was sort of areas of commercial management that we've done in the past. And as you can see, and as Josie alluded to, a lot of progress has been made. And certainly we'll support Josie and her team reviewing certainly the risk, procurement risk, as you said, category management, and we're kind of working with a lot of their staff from an advisory perspective, at least at this point, and move forward on the commercial management objectives. So next slide, please. The next area where we spent time, of course, was customer experience. And for us, there's really a link to safety. So it's the areas that we looked at were certainly related to safety around our surface vehicles. And a while back, we looked at trends that were starting to indicate that potentially we were having some issues there. We looked at subway delays, mostly from a data perspective at that point, but again, since then, we've been reviewing things from crowding perspectives and safety again. The good news is that there's been a lot of proactive action there. And perhaps I'll just ask Jim to speak to it, because certainly one of the areas that we highlighted when we did our work was, again, opportunities to improve and strengthen the rules and compliance program, operator risk register, etc. So I'll ask Jim to speak if he's ready to go, and that would be great.
Sure, Chris. I can just provide a quick overview of what we've introduced in late 2019 as far as a rules compliance program. And basically, we've taken some operations supervisors, provided them with a lot of additional training on how to go out and do observations of our operators, and their job is to go out and make sure that the rules are being followed. Essentially, they so far in 2020, even despite the impact of COVID, where we had to redeploy many of them, we've still done 14,000 observations on our operators on everything from ensuring that we're crossing railway tracks according to our policy to how bus operators operate when they're making left and right hand turns, that our subway operators are being mindful of all of the procedures that they have to do when they're in a station to ensure customer safety at station stops, and so on. So that program has been quite successful so far, and we're looking forward to what it can do for the rest of 20 and into 21.
Thanks, Jim. Not sure if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, can I ask a quick question of Jim? Jim, is there any technology that we can use that can monitor the driving performance of our operators? I'm thinking of, the apps that insurance companies are now using with ordinary drivers to monitor speeds and sudden braking and that kind of thing. Do we have access to any of that kind of technology for buses?
Yes. So thank you, Commissioner. So there is part of the vision package that we have through Clever Devices that our CAD AVL system has an operator performance module, so we can track speeds, hard brake applications, things like that. We're also just at the at sort of the interest stage in some other technologies that include camera technologies, as well as just the bus performance and the operator performance modules. So we may have more to advise you of that, but for right now, we do have that feature in our vision system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. For information technology, I mean, this is an area where we've done some work, but we are probably working more in conjunction with Duction and his group. And of course, he has an IT QA group within his own department. So we really kind of work in collaboration with them as opposed to our own driving audits. However, main areas of review in the past was obviously looking at our use of video surveillance. I know that a camera strategy was sort of born out of that work, and progress is being made, and I think it's something that more details will come as they get fleshed out. As far as IT business interruption, of course, business continuity and resiliency work has been a large part of what we've been giving attention to over the last 6 months. So I'm sure there'll be things that come out of that that we'll report out at a later point. But generally, I know cybersecurity is always an interest of the ARMC. Duction gave a great board report update on work that he's been doing a couple of board meetings ago. But there's also focused work being done on further cybersecurity risk assessment, working with the AG in terms of sharing our plan, and there will be formal reporting out in order to comply with expectations from the city audit committee. I can't quickly see if Duction is online. I don't know if he wants to speak at a high level on that work. Can't really scan, so I guess if Duction's there, if he wants to jump in, I'll give him a minute. If he's not, like I said, it's really areas that will be further expanded upon. I thought I heard something.
I'm here, and I think you covered it well. We'll be looking at bringing in a vendor to help us do that risk assessment so that we can report back in Q1 of next year.
Perfect. Are there any questions on that, Ron? I know this is a...
Well, that's great. I look forward to the report in Q1.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So next slide, please. So the last area that we've sort of summarized our work on, obviously looking at operator absenteeism and overtime risks, payroll errors, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this is an area where Jim Ross would probably like to add a few comments, because I know there was a lot of initiatives and work being done to drive down overtime, certainly before COVID. And to a certain extent, I think it's continued, but again, I'll let Jim speak for himself there.
Sure, Chris, thank you. So overtime has been a focus in the operations group for some time, in reducing overtime and using labor dollars where they're most effective. So some of the things that we've been able to do over the course of the last year or so is to modify the schedules of our run as directed buses. The commissioners would be familiar with run as directed buses, but by modifying their schedules and their scheduled off days, we've been able to significantly reduce the amount of overtime that we pay when we have a subway closure and we have to bus shuttle for a full day or for a full weekend. That's a significant savings. The second thing is that on-time performance is improving. So we put a lot of effort into improving our on-time performance across all modes. And one of the benefits of improving your on-time performance is that your late in overtime reduces. The operators don't finish late anymore. So that has had a really significant savings. And then using our spare boards more efficiently and how we crew work more efficiently is starting to help us to reduce the amount of overtime that we pay for open crews. Those are really significant wins. We have a couple of more initiatives that we're going to try to do later into this year and then into 21 that we think will help us save some overtime as well. But really, the overtime savings that we've seen over comparing 19 to 20 sort of mid-year up to the end of P7, we've been able to save close to $6 million in overtime. So it's a pretty significant savings there. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jim, again. If there's any questions on that.
If I could just add, Chris, in today's agenda on item number 11, we actually have a few slides on overtime management, and it does show you, some of the results that Jim's talking about and how we've actually been able to bring that overtime down, and it's a continued priority for us.
Perfect, great. So you got the preview story here first. So I guess next slide, please, which I believe really is just indicating that for the formal presentation on this topic is kind of over. As I said, a main output for this, for our group, is to inform our work plan going forward. Obviously, these 6 risk areas are still sort of driving a lot of what our work's going to be. Regarding employee safety and customer safety, of course, with the COVID related or otherwise, we'll probably give more attention to health and safety risks, as well as looking at ways to continuously embed safety into our culture. As far as asset management, as I said before, I think we're going to have to give some review of the regulations that are emerging on that, and working with finance and Josie's groups, making sure that we're meeting those expectations, supporting the commercial management. In general, as I said earlier, disruption risk, something that is getting more attention, reviewing the mitigation strategies for things, both in terms of any budgeting impact. And just generally, obviously we've been busy during this last 6 months, so COVID didn't stop us. It's just that we have to be agile and change the way that we support management. And so there's been a lot of emphasis on sort of upfront advisory work and helping to set things up. And I'll speak to that further on other topics. But unless there's any specific questions on this item, I think we could move on to our next one, but I'll just pause to see if there are any questions.
I'm here.
Okay. So let's move on to our next item, which is essentially our initiative around developing an executive compliance certificate. And just as a bit of a preamble, this was an initiative that was in direct response to an ARMC request. Natalie in our office is a lawyer, got legal background, and she's been working closely with our legal department, Mike Atlas in particular. A lot of progress has been made on this initiative, and we really thought it was timely to bring that to the table. And we are looking for feedback on the draft certificate, which we included in the package, but we'll also have a final slide on it. So with no further ado, I'll introduce Nadia, and she will walk you through the presentation.
Good morning. My name is Nadia Pisano. I'm a manager with the Audit Risk and Compliance Department. Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you
Yes.
fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as Chris said, I've practiced law for some time before joining the TTC, so I'm happy to assist in developing the executive compliance certification process legislation and implementing that. And this presentation will go through the process. Next slide. So we'll start with a bit of background. On February 9th, 2017, the ARMC, this committee, had an education session where you reviewed your terms of reference and confirmed that the committee has oversight responsibility for
Nadia, sorry, can we just pause for a moment? Can you move away from the mic a little bit? It's really fuzzy. And just try to speak again. Just one moment. Okay, go ahead, Nadia.
Okay.
That's better. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I was saying, on
Sorry, Nadia, just don't lean into your computer. Just stay back and speak again.
Is this better?
No.
Do you want me to move forward to the right? Is that better?
No, there's a lot of feedback on your side. Is it possible for you to turn your mic down a little bit? Sorry about this, everyone. Just one moment.
Sorry about this. Turning the volume down. Is this better? I'm wondering if I should shut off my video.
Do you have an earpiece? Like, are you using a headset?
No. I don't often do this, so
Yeah.
on this format, I'm usually on Skype, so maybe we're having some technical difficulty.
It's if you just speak softly.
Okay. Is this better?
It's a little bit better, yes. So just speak softly.
Okay.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, on February 9, 2017, this committee had an education session where it confirmed its responsibility for oversight over TTC's compliance with laws and regulations. And out of that meeting came a directive to staff. So the directive is laid out there for you. It's in two parts. The first part is implementing a process to facilitate an annual compliance confirmation of the various laws and regulations governing the TTC. And this presentation will address that piece of the directive. The second part deals with significant impacts of changes in laws and regulations as they materialize. And that goes really to the function of legislative scanning for new laws and amendments, which is a separate part requiring some further internal discussion. So, which I will address at the end of this presentation. Next slide. So the purpose of the executive compliance certification is really threefold. It's to support the ARMC in fulfilling its oversight responsibilities. It will also provide the CEO and the ARMC a formal mechanism for reporting executive compliance assertions, and it will demonstrate accountability, support fostering a culture of compliance, and ultimately reduce the risk of liability to the organization, its employees, officers, and directors. Next slide. So I think during its initial meeting, this committee did identify sort of a gap where there was no corporate-wide process to confirm and document compliance requirements. So while I think internally we do appreciate that we're pretty good at legal compliance and we have a lot of pockets within the organization charged with this task, there was no formal process to document this work, which I think is really important when it comes to accountability. So what we did was we developed this process, a draft certificate, which I will get to in a minute, and we consulted with our executive team on it and listened carefully to the feedback that we got. And some of that feedback was that they needed a little more legal education to be in a position where they were going to feel comfortable signing off on a compliance certificate, and additional clarity on the extent of their accountability for compliance. So where does that responsibility start? Where does it end? And what is the extent of the accountability? They also identified the need in some cases for additional controls and compliance assurance. And I think this is an area where the art department can really be helpful in that we can assist by identifying opportunities for testing. So what is our degree to which we are complying with legal requirements? Next slide. So this slide lays out our progress to date. We were before you on February 11th, 2020, where you endorsed the development of an executive compliance certificate, which we've drafted and we'll show you. Hopefully you've had a chance to review it. We've also, before developing that certificate, we went out and researched what other organizations were doing. So we looked at what Metrolinx was doing, we looked at the London Underground, we looked at a number of Commonwealth countries, the Ontario Health Association and hospital associations, and essentially compared certificates, took the best elements of each, and realized no two are the same. So crafted something that was customized to our TTC environment. We quickly realized that we needed to partner with our legal department to help us with the legal education aspect and to identify our key list of requirements, key statutes and bylaws. And as I said, we conducted those executive consultation sessions, drafted the certificate, and thus far our legal department has assisted us with preparing legislative summaries for each of the requirements we've identified that are listed on our current draft certificate. Next slide. So what are the outcomes and the deliverables of this process? What we envision is a CEO covering memo and a package of executive compliance certificates attached to that covering memo. This is really based on the approach that Metrolinx adopted, which we thought was a good idea. They call it a memo of attestation. What we're asking within the certificates is that executives report non-compliance matters. And once we have those reports come in, we can ask our legal department to vet those reported matters to identify whether they are legitimate legal issues, where they are, corrective action plans can be developed, and our department can assist with the tracking and monitoring of those action plans. All to support, of course, annual reporting to the CEO and this committee on the process. Next slide. So this is our current list of key 15 requirements for the TTC. It is not everything, but it is what we determine to be very important requirements based on a number of criteria. These obligations span across the organization. They affect multiple departments. Some of them carry very steep financial penalties, reputational damages involved where there's a violation of any of these. And many of them have specific provisions around director's liability. So for those types of reasons, we are focusing on these in year one. And of course, the certificate will ask executives to attest that to the best of their knowledge, they are compliant with these requirements. Next slide. This is language that is that comes right out of the certificate itself. We're asking that TTC executives acknowledge they are subject to and required to comply with key statutes and bylaws, that they will exercise best efforts to achieve compliance, that they will report any non-compliance matters, and will expeditiously initiate corrective action when required. So these expectations are really nothing new, nothing above what we already do, but I think simply reporting in a formal process, our accountability is key. Next slide. This is our current list of the executive team, and these will comprise the signers for the certificates. Next slide. Here we've laid out roles and responsibilities for each key department, and including our executive team. So as I've said, they will acknowledge compliance on the certificate and report on any non-compliance matters. The TTC legal department is also a key player in this and will be responsible for providing legal education to our executives and advising on any reporting non-compliance matters. And of course, our department, which will facilitate collection and submission of the certificates, track the corrective action plans for any matters, and report on the certification process to the executive and the ARMC. Next slide. This is our suggested timeline that we're putting before you. Initially, we thought we could get all of this legal education done before the end of the year, and then COVID hit, and we kind of had to revisit all of our timelines. But in a way, it was a good thing, because we began to realize that many of these legal requirements and the statutes involved are quite comprehensive. So we need time in between the sessions. So there are 15, thinking that we would address 5 requirements per session. Ideally, we'd get the first session completed by the end of the year, with sessions 2 and 3 done in the first and second quarter of next year, all culminating and the certificate sign off perhaps in around July of 2021. And what that does is provide time for one-on-one sessions with the legal department, maybe some assurance testing from ARC, all to get the team to a position where they have that comfort level to be able to certify assurance with compliance to those requirements. Next slide. So this is the last slide for the presentation, and it essentially lists our next steps. One of our next steps was to solicit feedback from this committee to present you with the draft executive compliance certificate legislation and the timeline for your comments. And once we get the green light and the go ahead, we can then go ahead and circulate a communication to the executive and schedule those legal education sessions and prepare that final submission to you for the third quarter of 2021. So that's the formal process. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that's involved. I'm creating a directory of laws and major regulations, which will list the over 100 laws and major regulations that apply to the TTC, and go ahead and map those requirements to all of our activities, policies, programs, and the people responsible. So that's some key background work that is necessary in helping us to understand where are some good opportunities for compliance testing, what are our high priorities. And lastly, the second bullet kind of brings us 360 to the second part of the directive, which really dealt with legislative scanning. And that will require another conversation internally about where best that function sits within the organization to keep abreast of each new law and amendment that may impact the TTC. We do have pockets of that activity that occurs. So the Safety and Environment Department does put out a quarterly report of safety and environmental legislation and updates. And the question may be, how do we roll that out to the organization so that everything is covered in that model? And so that's the end of the presentation. I don't know if we want to put up the certificate itself, or if you've had a chance to review the certificate, if there's any questions about what we drafted in the timeline.
So why don't we go to questions? Do you have any questions, Alan?
I've been waiting for a question about the McNichol bus garage. I just wanted to do that at the appropriate time.
Okay.
If it's all right to do it now, I will. Otherwise, I'll wait.
Actually, you might want to wait down because we will be covering that off soon.
Okay.
Joanne, any questions on the compliance certificate?
I do. Just a quick one. I think it was the fourth bullet point, Nadia, where I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing the slide, but I think it spoke to procedures, operational procedures, and policies. I think that's going to be an area where some hard work will have to be done, because of course the entire management team will have that policies and procedures reflect the requirements in the law, but some of those requirements may be aspirational or require interpretation. So maybe to spend just a minute just talking us through how you're going to accomplish that, because I guess my suspicion is that that's going to take an awful lot of effort. The education part of the exercise will achieve some of that, but that may in fact require a lot more rolling up the sleeves and some serious discussion and review.
Thank you for your question. I do agree with you. There's a lot of opportunity here, and there are many different sources of compliance, not just laws and regulations, which is a good starting point because that's what we're required to comply with. But as you've stated, there are programs and procedures, and those requirements should be seen throughout. A comprehensive compliance program probably deals with laws, regulations, policies, procedures, and programs. And there's nothing to say that we can't create a phase 2 and a phase 3 of this compliance certificate to ensure that there is compliance to those other sources. I think you're right. The directory will be the roadmap for what we are required to comply with in terms of laws and regulations, but how is that carried through to our operational business activities? So it's important to index the procedures and the programs that help us comply with the law. And I'm just embarking on that, and it is a lot of work, but I think it's key.
And just one other point, but perhaps more to you, Rick, that it's often too easy to sort of look to either the legal department or the audit and risk department, those who are providing guidance and saying, well, okay, you guys own that. But really, that's not the case. The people who own this are the individuals in the departments. And so creating that culture is really critical, because we don't want, you don't want individuals just saying, well, I thought that was legal, or I thought that was audit and risk. What audit and risk and legal are there to provide, as many other departments are, is guidance, but ownership has to really sit in the departments that are responsible for the execution of that area.
Through you, Chair. Absolutely. One of the things we've been talking a lot about is the educational part of it, the training part, and then the understanding exactly of what you said of who has that ownership at what area. So that's what when we go through this, we really going to focus on that. Who is responsible ultimately in that area? You're right, absolutely right. It's not, I often say it's not the purchasing department that's responsible for managing what the operating department's doing with the material, for instance. So we're going to make that clarity right through the organization. And Josie leading the whole, as you just sort of talk about the commercial management, the procurement, and the category management, is trying to get that understanding out to everybody as we go through that.
Thanks, Rick, and thanks, Joanne. I had one quick comment and question for Nadia. The comment is, the difficulty in this exercise is knowing what you don't know. Trying to figure out all those rules and regulations that apply to you that you're not necessarily aware of. And I'm sure that's what freaks out the operating managers. When I was subject to this kind of a regime at the bank, it freaked me out a little bit as well. And at least in banking, there are services you can go to, third-party services that actually catalog rules and regulations in various jurisdictions. I don't know if that exists in our industry, but to the extent it does, it would be great. To the extent it doesn't, it's probably something that would be worth trying to collaborate with other transit agencies to come up with a joint effort on this. That's my comment. The question is, given that that's the difficulty of knowing what you don't know, the easier part is, are we complying with the things that we do know about? And my question was, has anything come up so far in this process where managers said, oh gosh, that's a rule that I'm aware of and we're not following it? Do we know of any of those issues of non-compliance today?
Not so much requirements that they weren't aware of yet, although, once we roll out this first certificate, we may have more reporting, and that's the purpose of it. But what we've heard about are some areas where there are opportunities for testing, right? So we know that, we do work from heights. We know we have lockout tagout procedures that are very important. We know we have racking throughout the organization. And the question is, are we doing a robust enough job of testing compliance to all of the requirements? And I think that's where ARC can really help. As we go through each requirement in the directory and we engage in a conversation with the owner of that area, I think we will quickly begin to see what the gaps are, if there are any gaps. And that's the hard work of this process.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, perhaps, Christine, we can go back to you for the last part of the agenda.
Yes.
Hi, it's Brian here. If I could make a comment.
Sure, go ahead, Brian.
Sure. one thing I think we need to distinguish is legal's role and the operations role, as Joanne said. And the legal people know the law, but what they don't know is the details of what's really going on out in the field. And the operations people know that, but they are not lawyers. And so despite all of this, we are not going to be able to have people memorize and retain day after day all the regulations and all the legislation that might apply to their work. But hopefully the key pieces are retained, and that when something does come up, there's a red flag at least that goes up. And as Nadia said, legal is going to be involved in this, and hopefully there's a call to legal, so that there can be a deep dive if there is a concern. And so it is legal working together with the operations people, with the engineers, and with others to make this work effectively.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. And maybe my only added point to what Brian and Nadia have alluded to is we've already sort of used this as an opportunity to have some greater discussion. We sort of were invited by Fort, our Chief Infrastructure and Engineering, to speak with his group on this topic and sort of moving through different pieces of bylaws and regulations, legislation that's on that list. And we booked, I think, an hour, and it was really good, but an hour wasn't obviously enough to have a deep dive into all of the pieces. But I think, to your point, what we're really trying to do when we say mapping is really make those connections between what is the expectation outlined in the legislation and how is that being operationalized. And it links back to the risks. So ARC, that's why we have C in our name now, the whole compliance idea, in that we really want to make sure that we are doing testing and supporting that type of work in areas that it is high risk, either from a legislative perspective or, as Nadia alluded to, sometimes it's more about the professional or the industry expectations. Canada isn't necessarily governed by as much legislation for transit as the US, but we can certainly look to the US for some guidelines and ideas. So that is going to be a major initiative of ours. And as Brian suggested, they're there to be called upon proactively as opposed to always, reactively. And I think just by having this initial list of legislation being signed to by chiefs, it will get attention. And if people aren't comfortable or have questions about what does this really mean for my area, then this will presumably prompt greater discussion. So I think I'll leave it on that. As far as the next topic, I sort of framed it as our COVID-19 work activities. As I mentioned earlier, since mid-March, our team's been essentially working from home in compliance with the instructions and the lockdowns, etc. So a lot of our work in March and April is what I would describe as being advisory. We did a lot of what I'm calling desktop procedural reviews. So obviously during COVID, there were changes in procedures, protocols being developed in response to. So we would try to review and give sort of some upfront feedback to be incorporated. And some of the key areas that we touched on were around the electronic invoice approval process, to make sure that there were still controls in place over payments going out. That's probably work that will go back now in the future to look more from an assurance point of view and compliance. We looked at the preliminary enhanced cleaning and disinfecting procedures that were pulled together. Again, we recognized that there was an opportunity for safety assurance checks to perhaps step in and do more quality and independent checks, not only in the cleaning and disinfecting, but speaking with Rich and Fort, there was, expectations around physical distancing and using of masks. So again, safety has really stepped up and provided a lot of support in that area. And we also reviewed the Wheel-Trans special COVID-related transport requests. So obviously during the height of COVID, there were expectations and requests for support, and we simply reviewed extensively the documentation that had been pulled together around ensuring that the operators were being protected, that our high-risk customers were being served in a safe manner. And that was sort of the work we focused on, and we were able to do that from home because, as I said, it was really reviewing the documentation and having discussions. Then we kind of moved on, and Fort requested us to come and review his PPE controls on the shop floor. So this was something a little different. I mean, shop floor management supervisors aren't normally tasked with controlling any sort of inventory in terms of conducting counts, but I think Fort really wanted to get the message across that PPE was really quite a valuable commodity at this point, wanted to prevent any misuse or shortages. And I think recognizing that just asking for audit folks to come in and do some counts, review processes, we just created a presence. So I was very grateful that I had 2 volunteers from my staff who were willing to, mask up and put on gloves and go out on site to conduct some site visits. And that was Wasim and Peter. So they did a couple of counts at different locations multiple times, and we gave a presentation and feedback to Fort around, certainly the message was out there that control was important. But obviously, like I said, shop floor inventory management, something new. So we left him with some suggestions on how to improve count procedures that would make his burn rate and estimates of usage more accurate. And I believe Fort's asked us to come back in the fall just to conduct some more sort of check-in points. And again, I think it's really just to keep that presence and importance on controls being visible. So I don't think I know Fort's on the call. I don't know if he wants to jump in and say anything on that. It's just a sort of a quick piece of work that we did. Fort, I'm not sure if you want to jump in or not. If not, we'll just move on.
Yeah, I don't think we need to more information on that. I think we can move on.
Perfect. Okay, so the next piece of work that we did was actually, as I said before, we did a desktop review of the cleaning and disinfecting procedures. Then we moved back into providing more assurance by doing some high, site visits and observations. And we started with our stations and public washrooms. Obviously, we've been communicating to customers and building their confidence to come back to the system by assuring them that we're keeping things as clean and safe as possible. So we basically selected, again, 2 staff willing to go out and make site visits, Johanna and Victor, and they visited 12 stations randomly, incognito, and basically showed up an hour before scheduled cleanings were to take place. Obviously, expectations around enhanced cleaning for the public washrooms, which are done by a third-party contractor, is to be done every 90 minutes. And for certain stations, there's basically a dedicated crew. So when it came to the contractors, we really didn't have any issues. The facilities were being kept clean to the extent possible. We saw evidence of checklists being filled out and that the visits had been made on time, etc. So really no issues there other than a general comment of their using PPE. As far as our station cleaning, again, expectations to enhance cleaning on high touch point areas, some expanded expectations that had been outlined for the janitors. Of the stations that we visited, there was general compliance to the schedule. There was just a couple of incidents where it was not, and we brought that to the attention of stations management immediately, and they dealt with it accordingly. Overall, our observations support the need for sort of improving supervisory controls. Obviously, the nature of the work is people are showing up sometimes at multiple stations, trying to get the work done in the time frame that's being allocated and getting on to the next one. And it's trust-based. There is certainly supervisors who will make periodic visits, but they're not necessarily covering the entire shift as our team did. So in general, we thought there was opportunities for improvements over the supervisory controls, as well as perhaps tailoring the schedules to make sure, not to basically map out all of the different pieces of equipment and tailor it for each station so that there would be a certain flow, and therefore achieving greater efficiencies and ensuring completion of the cleaning activities for each station, and sequencing it. So we've kind of left those suggestions with management. We looked at some other minor things like the floor operated hand sanitizer dispensing. We noted a couple of observations where the liquid didn't seem to be coming out. Again, brought that to the attention of stations management. They had explanations, and there was just some mechanics that were being dealt with. And then in general, and this is again a broader topic that we know safety's been working on, the reality of it is you can clean the station and then minutes later have people touching it. So there's really an opportunity to do what I'm kind of phrasing as CSI testing, in that we're currently have procured some equipment that can perhaps measure, in a sense, the virus and bacterial that's perhaps being left and deposited even after a cleaning. So that's going to be an interesting before and after disinfecting conditions that might get reviewed. So other than perhaps Jim wanting to just take very quickly any response or comments to the work that we did, just jump in quickly.
You can move on, Christine. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, so now we're going to get on to the topic that presumably Heisey would like to touch on. Last December, we presented. Sorry? Yep.
Sorry, I just want to break in. I think this last section is well covered in your comments. I'd suggest on this one, unless you've got something to add that wasn't in the materials, that perhaps we go straight to questions.
Perfect. And the only opportunity what I was going to give for Gary was to perhaps expand, and maybe it's going to come out through the questions, was on the development of that executive contract review committee, as well as speak to McNichol. So I'm happy to pass it over.
Let's do that. Let's invite Gary to do that, and then we'll go to questions. So Gary, are you there?
Yes, I'm on the line. Just to give you an overview, we've looked across the business and we've noticed there was an inconsistency about how projects were managed, not just with respect to contract amendments. So what we've actually set up, we're going to set up the Executive Contract Review Committee. And again, and I'll explain a little bit about it further. The focus is going to be in understanding, reviewing, approving contract and project amendment oblique changes that may impact the cost, the scope of the work, and also the delivery. Is it going to extend the delivery of the time? And that's going to be applicable to both capital projects, service contracts, and agreements. Again, what we've done is we've looked at the limits, and we've agreed certain limits that will stay within the project. And again, anything effectively above 5% of the original contract value and anything over $250,000 will come to the Executive Committee for review and approval. Again, the committee is going to be set up on a weekly basis. There may be something to that meeting, or there may not. So we're going to do it every weekly. And on the fourth weekly, we're going to have a meeting where we're actually going to do a deep dive into certain contracts. But also at that one, we'll be actually getting reports about all contract changes that's happened below those thresholds, so we can look at it and see if there's any trends coming through, and that'll help us look at any contracts that we may think will trigger those limits going forward. So that, and again, what we're not doing is, because we've got a dedicated process for approving the original contract, so we're not going to look at that. There's already a robust process in place for that. It's really just looking at the changes to contracts, agreements, and project scope going forward.
Why don't you keep going with McNichol, and then we'll come back for questions.
Again, just McNichol's, we had a lessons learned, the audits come in, and there was actually a number of points raised by the audit committee. And again, there was 11 effective comments made and observations actually made. Again, we get 2 best practices, I believe, that we're doing, looking at the experience management and the use of fairness monitors. They also brought up concerns about how we deliver, how we actually selected the delivery model. And again, we're going to look at that going forward, all major projects just now. And an example of that one just now is the Bloor Young. Again, we've actually went out to an outside consultant to look at the delivery options analysis for that. So, and again, we've done that on the Scarborough Subway extension previously to that. So all major ones. What we don't have is a formal documented procedure on how we actually do that, and that's something we'll be working with Josie when through the commercial management route, how we document that, and what's the trigger point for going out to look at the delivery options analysis. What's the thresholds? Is it value? Is it complexity? What is it? So we've got to look at that going forward. The other points that was actually brought up was looking about increasing the competition, because effectively we originally had 3 bidders that qualified, 2 of them dropped off, so we're left with effectively 1 bidder on this contract. So we're just going to look at maybe look at a minimum of 5 bidders going forward. So if any drop out during the tendering process, therefore we still have competition for the final selection of those. The other thing was looking at an independent certifier. And again, this is something that we're going to look at rather than bringing an independent in. We're looking at commercial management is going to be independent to the project when it's introduced, when we bring the commercial management in. And we're looking at the commercial management team will be the independent certifier then. So they work in the project, but they report to finance. They don't report through the capital works themselves. So again, we're looking at the independency there as well. The other thing, another one of the things they brought up was project governance and how you document, not so much the day-to-day work, but when senior management get involved, and how do you document those when they make decisions. They weren't documented particularly well, so they're looking at a process how we do that. And we've been working with the legal team in that and how to deal with that. So again, they've come back with how do we take notes and without prejudice meetings, because they're strategizing. So again, how do you document them? So we've worked clearly with, and they've developed guidelines for off-the-record dialogue for those types of meetings. And we had elements around quality. We had about 3 observations on quality management. One about the quality management, the contractor not implementing his quality management system. So that was a lessons learned going through. They also looked about a system to look at NCRs and control NCRs. So that's more looking at the software and how we actually control NCRs. And the other part was about penalties for people not closing out NCRs quickly. And that's the other ones we looked at there. And I think that covers the main part of the report. So I'll take any questions now.
Gary, let's go to questions. Let's start with you, Alan.
Okay, so by the way, I wanted to compliment everybody today. This was an amazingly collegial presentation. No manager took the spotlight. It was a shared presentation. It's exactly what good management should be, in my view. And I want to congratulate everyone on how it was done. But getting into the meat of this. So my memory on this is that there was a lot of enthusiasm from some on our board for design, build, and triple P, and it was going to be so much better. And then we were kind of deflated when we caught the bids on McNichol, because there weren't as many as we thought. It didn't, and as I remember, 1 or 2 of them weren't compliant, correct? Is that right? I remember that 1 or 2 of the bids we couldn't accept because they wanted to change reference points for the bid, for example. They had other ideas about how to do the job than we had spec'd. That's a question.
Gary, I think you're on mute.
No, I'm not on mute.
No,
Yeah, no, it's me. Sorry about that. Again, yes, you're correct here. One of the things, one of them done when we actually put our DB contract together, some people objected to some of the terms and conditions and the transfer of risk within our DBA contract. that was, yeah, and the other one just withdrew. Ellis Don, they ended up being disqualified on a technical error in their design. So that was the 3 bidders, and you know, and the last one qualified. So with one, it was
in fact, we only had one qualified bidder
at
on
the
that.
end. At the end, yes, we did. That's correct.
And that's a terrible outcome. Don't you agree?
From a competition point of view, yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you, I understand that you talk about reviewing processes, and I'm respectful of sort of the higher level theoretical structure of bidding and how you should do things. But how do we prevent that from happening again? So the complaints, Ellis Don's failure, the other contractor that wanted to do it in a different way that they thought was cheaper. Can you translate your report into how you're going to address what happened?
Again, one of the things we're actually going to look at is how you set up a DBA contract and the terms and conditions within that to make it fair. Again, in any contract, you know, a lot of people's going to have a debate about the transfer of risk, who holds the risk as you actually go forward. And again, I think we've got to be open and listen to some of the feedback we get from contractors rather than just disbanding them. But also, I think we should also open up to a higher number where possible. So you don't have the failing where you select 3 and only one at the end of the day puts a qualified bid in.
So would it help if we did a request for interest first?
But we always do put a request for interest in. Yeah, in all major projects we go for an RFQ qualification.
Yeah.
RFI, then RFQ, and then the RFP goes out. That's the normal process. Yeah.
So
it was just unfortunate in this case that we actually get down to 1 bidder, and there was, you know, there was a lot of time pressure on this one as well to get a contract placed at the time.
So look, I think this is an important enough issue that it should be the particular issue of this process, and not the McNichol garage, and not to point fingers, but it looks to me like we're going to be doing 1 or 2 new bus garages in the next 5 years or 10 years. And we need to not have happen what happened this last time. And I think the board needs to have a bigger discussion, because I still don't think we've gotten down to the bottom of the procurement of large capital projects issue in the way that we wanted to, at least that has been expressed on the board over a number of years. So that's my only observation, that I think this is a bigger issue than just the audit committee. I think there will be interest by other board members in the topic, and we need to have maybe an agenda item about the McNichol garage. And I don't know if it should be confidential, because some of the issues might be in relation to the specific contracts. So we have a deep understanding why we ended up with only 1 qualified bid on such a big project, and how we can make sure that will never happen again, because I'm still not certain how we can ensure a better outcome based on what you've told me. And maybe that's lack of understanding on my part. So that's a bit of a speech, but that's it.
Yeah, but just to give you comfort on that, you know, and as I explained under when we're looking at the Bloor Young, which is a approximate 1.5 billion project we're talking about here, we have actually hired an external consultant to do a procurement options analysis. We've used CIMA for that one, and they're in the process of finalising that report just now for us. So that will give you an example of how we're actually going to looking at the market to help us, guide us through this procurement options analysis. And again, once you do that, once you decide it, then you've got to look at your terms and conditions associated with the type of contract. So there's 2 stages to it. You decide what type of what method you want to use, and then you've got to look at the terms and conditions around that type of contract as well. It's a 2-stage approach here.
So Ron, this whole package now goes to the board, right?
That's a good question. Does it, Christine?
I don't believe we put it forward for the board. It was just an information update.
So maybe I can just ask that you discuss with Rick and Joanne whether it would be appropriate to have a lessons learned presentation of the whole board on the McNichol bus garage and procurement issues that arise out of it.
Well, you know, Alan, another way of tackling this, I think you raised a really important point, and it's come up at the board before as well, in terms of, you know, how do we engender more competition for large projects. Gary raised the issue of the Bloor Young project, which is going to probably be the next big one on the docket. Perhaps we could ask management to specifically come back when they are bringing that project forward for approval with a deliberate strategy as to how we will ensure as much competition as possible for that project. Because I think that's the core issue that you're get some focus on.
It is. The only concern I have is I don't want to have, we have some memory on the board right now. And if that happens in the next 6 months or a year, that's great. If it's not, if it's 2 years down the road, I'm not sure. I think it might be too late to keep sort of continuity on the discussion, and you can lose it.
Well, look, another way to handle it is we could simply put another agenda item on a future ARMC meeting to ask, you know, Gary's folks to come back with, you know, a presentation on that specific item. How do we engender as much competition as possible on major projects? And I think that's within the remit of this committee. So I think that's appropriate for us to ask for.
Well, then let's do that, and we can set that up. That answers my concern. And I don't mean to be to harp on this topic, but it's come up over and over. It came up about the York University TYSSE extension. It's come up about this project. I've seen it happen. You know, we've had sole suppliers and very large contracts. It's a recurring theme, and it's one where the TTC has been criticized. I'm not sure fairly, but they have been by people in the outside of the organization. So let's deal with it at the next meeting or the meeting after that.
Okay, Gary, can we leave that with you to organize a review and presentation on that? You can coordinate when that comes in the next 1 or 2 meetings with Christine.
Yes, I'll do that. I'll take that action on.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot.
Well,
Joanne,
could I just add a point? Because I agree. I think Ellen's raised a really important question, but I think what we don't want to miss when we look at it again and take a deeper dive is answering the question of is this model really appropriate? You know, perhaps we can't make it work. So an analysis of the why. Going back to say, why did firms not bid? What prevented them from doing that, or what prevented them from staying in the game? And are there answers to those concerns, or are there no answers to those concerns? So really, that deeper dive of perhaps this is a model that is just not doable here.
well, and I think your issue, Joanne, is the trade-off between transfer of risk and encouragement of competition. Because to some extent, I think there are trade-offs on those two issues.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah.
Right. So perhaps, Gary, you could include that in that deeper dive.
Yeah, again, just to the point I'm making is it's not just about the procurement options. That once you agree on procurement options, then you've got to look at your terms and conditions that you actually apply to that model that you're actually using, because you could pre-qualify certain people, but then due to the risk within these terms and conditions, they may back out at that point in time. So you've got to look at both elements of it. And again, just harping on a little bit, because coming from the UK, we have a standard form of contract. It's called the NEC, and it covers all models of construction methods. It takes you through design and build, design bid build. It takes you through sole source. It takes you through alliance. It takes you through them all. So the industry agreed to all those. The full construction industry within the UK, and now that's went to the Middle East, and it's now beginning to come into the States, and it's also beginning now coming into Canada in some way. And it might be worth, and it's a longer term project, looking at have it. Maybe we could contact industry, look at the bigger picture. How do you have a standard form of contract? Therefore, people know before they're going in what they're bidding against and the terms and conditions they're going against.
That sounds fantastic if we could make
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Again, but it's not just the TTC. You'd have to get industry to buy into that as well. But you know, it is something that's creeping. It started in Europe and in the UK. It's now in the Middle East, and it's now beginning to prop up now in the States and in Canada, and to a certain extent as well now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will leave that with you, Gary.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Alan. Do you have any further questions for before we go to receive this item or comments?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Joanne?
None from me.
Okay. And last word, Christine. Anything else you wanted to raise before we vote to receive this item?
No, this was great. I really appreciate, Alan's comment. It definitely is a village to complete an audit, basically. And so for management to contribute even just briefly their progress and statements, I really appreciated that as well. And I guess the only last item that we had, of course, was around fare evasion, but I think we all recognize that ridership has to sort of get up to a higher point, strategies have to be implemented, and then that's when we will resume any sort of work that ARC will do to support that. So again, thank you everybody for your patience, and I'll let you, Ron, you finish off.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So Joanne, can I ask you to move receipt of this item?
So moved.
Alan, you'll second?
Unquestionably.
And therefore, we are all in support of this item, carries unanimously. I have one last question before we move to adjourn, unless others have questions as well. Rick, I wanted to ask you if you could just comment briefly on the status of recruiting the next chief auditor for TTC.
Yes, I can do that. We're in discussions with our outside firm to do that right now. Gemma Piemontes has been working, had discussions this week with them regarding what we're looking to have. I've also talked with the AG, Beverly, regarding a little input from her on the interaction with the TTC. So I'll keep this this committee up to speed on as we move forward.
What kind of timeline do you think we're on, Rick, to surface candidates and look at a potential appointment?
Gemma, if I could ask you to chime in, when we met Monday, you were talking with them on that. Did we get feedback on that yet?
So I met with Kevin Gormley from Boyden yesterday, and you know we've got a number of recruits going on.
Sorry, Gemma, can you speak up, please?
Oh, of course. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
A little bit louder, please.
Okay. So I spoke with Kevin Gormley yesterday from Boyden, and as you know, we have a number of recruitments going on at the same time. So part of the plan was to put together a plan in terms of what the timelines are going to be for each one of those recruits. So I can assure you that it is a priority for us. I can't give a timeline now, but perhaps we can come back with something more definitive in the near future.
Okay, thank you for that, Gemma. I might just comment that given the relationship of the chief auditor to this committee, I think you should include an interview for at least finalist candidates. And I'm not talking about big slates. I'm talking about, 1, 2, or 3 with probably with myself as chair of the committee. So if you could incorporate that into the process, that would be appreciated.
Will do. Thanks, Ron.
Okay. Joanne, anything else before we move to terminate?
No, I'm good.
Alan, anything else?
I just unmuted. No, nothing.
Okay, so Joanne, I'll ask you to move a motion to terminate, or do we need a motion to terminate, Chrisanne?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Joanne, you'll move that motion.
So moved.
Alan, you'll second it.
I will.
All in favor?
Done.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you in the board meeting shortly.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.